Welcome to Psalms Layer by Layer, a project of Cambridge Digital Bible Research. In this video, we will walk through the top 3 exegetical issues in Psalm 26. These are issues that any interpreter of the psalm, whether they're studying the text in Hebrew or looking at a number of translations, is likely to encounter, and each of these issues impacts how one understands the meaning of the psalm as a whole. In Psalm 26, the top 3 issues are the syntax of verse 1, the text of verse 12, and the text of verse 8, which either talks about the dwelling place, which is God's house, or the beauty of God's house. The first exegetical issue for Psalm 26 is a syntactic issue, and it's found in the second half of verse 1. We've translated this line as, "And I have trusted in the Lord, I shall not waver." The Hebrew text of this line says, "Uva Adonai batachti lo im'ad." The line consists of 2 clauses. The first clause is Uva Adonai batachti, and I have trusted in the Lord. And the second clause is lo im'ad, which we've translated, I shall not waver. Each of these 2 clauses are, according to our analysis, independent clauses. And other translations have something similar. The KJV, for example, says, I have trusted also in the Lord, therefore I shall not slide. In other words, the KJV understands lo im'ad as an independent clause, and it includes the italicized therefore in order to make clear the semantic relationship between this clause and the previous clause. Because I have trusted in the Lord, therefore I will not waver. Some translations, however, understand the second clause, lo im'ad, to be dependent on the first clause. The RSV, for example, says, and I have trusted in the Lord without wavering. According to this interpretation, lo im'ad is a circumstantial clause, not introducing a completely new idea, but rather modifying the previous idea, saying something about the psalmist's trust. And this understanding of the syntax is definitely possible. There are a number of other examples where a negative clause modifies or specifies the circumstances of a previous clause. For example, Leviticus 1:17 says, he shall tear it open by the wings, not dividing it completely. The circumstantial clause, not dividing it completely, or without dividing it completely, is in Hebrew lo yavdil, a yictol verb modified by the negative particle lo. It's exactly what we find in Psalm 26:1, and so there's good reason for the RSV's translation in Psalm 26. But there are also some potential problems with the RSV's translation. In the first place, if the psalmist were describing the way in which he has trusted in the Lord, then we might have expected a katal verb to match the tense of batachti instead of a yictol verb. For example, in the Leviticus passage, the tense of the circumstantial clause agrees with the tense of the clause it modifies. The yictol lo yavdil, without dividing, corresponds to the future tense of the previous vukatal verb. Another potential problem with the RSV translation has to do with the semantics of the word ma'at. The Semantic Dictionary of Biblical Hebrew defines this word as a process by which one's journey through life does not go as intended or expected. So, for example, in Psalm 18, the psalmist says, you have given me the shield of your salvation, your right hand has supported me, and your gentleness made me great. You gave a wide place for my steps under me, and my feet did not slip. V'lo ma'adu karsulai. In this passage, as in other passages, not slipping or not wavering refers to living in security, to not taking any dangerous turns down life's path. And understood in this sense, the word doesn't work so well as a descriptor of trust. Rather, it makes more sense to see the not wavering as a consequence of the psalmist's trust. Because he trusts in the Lord, he will not waver. He will live in security because the Lord is protecting him. This is similar to what we find in Psalm 21:8. For the king trusts in the Lord, and through the steadfast love of the Most High he shall not be moved. This understanding of Psalm 26:1, in which not wavering is the result of trusting, is also represented in the Septuagint, which says, Ke epito kirio elpison, umi astheniso, and since I trust in the Lord, I shall not grow weak. And so in conclusion, we have analyzed lo im'ad as an independent clause. Therefore, because I've trusted in the Lord, I shall not waver. This interpretation best accounts for the tense and the semantics of the verb. It also accords with the translation given in the Septuagint. If asked to rate our level of confidence in this view on a scale of A to D, A being the highest, D being the lowest, we would give this interpretation a B rating. The second issue for Psalm 26 is in the very last line of the psalm, the second half of verse 12. We've translated this line as, "In assemblies I shall bless the Lord." And the majority of modern translations have something similar. Some modern translations, however, follow the Septuagint, and they read, "In assemblies I shall bless you, Lord." So whereas according to most translations, the verse is speaking about the Lord, "I shall bless the Lord," according to some translations, the verse is speaking to the Lord, "I shall bless you, Lord." The issue is a textual issue, and the two different interpretations are the result of the addition or the omission of one Hebrew letter. The traditional Hebrew text, the Masoretic text, reads, "B'makelim uvarek Adonai." And if we follow this text, Adonai is the third person object of the verb bless. "In assemblies I shall bless the Lord." If, however, we add an additional kaf to the end of the verb avarech, such that we now have avarecha, the text reads, "I will bless you." And the final word, Adonai, is no longer the object of the verb, but is now a vocative. "I will bless you, Lord." In the early Hebrew script, final letters were not distinguished from non-final letters, so there was no graphic distinction between kaf at the end of a word and kaf in the middle of a word. Similarly, in some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, final letters are not used consistently. So the original text of Psalm 26:12 might have read, "Avarecha," with two identical-looking kafs at the end, and a scribe might have accidentally omitted one of the kafs, giving us the reading we now have in the Masoretic text. It's also possible, however, that the original text read uvarech with one kaf, and that a scribe accidentally wrote it twice, giving us the reading we now have in the Septuagint. The best evidence we have for determining which reading is original is probably the psalm itself. Throughout most of the psalmist addresses the Lord in the second person, and vocatives appear throughout the psalm. This might support the vocative reading in verse 12, which means following the Septuagint and reading two kafs, avarecha, instead of one kaf, avarech. When we look closer, however, we see that not every reference to the Lord is in the second person. In the second line of verse 1, the psalmist says, "I have trusted in the Lord." And here the Lord is in the third person. This exception to the use of second person here at the beginning of the psalm might be significant because there are a number of parallels between the beginning of the psalm and the end of the psalm. Notice, for example, that both verse 1 and verse 11 talk about walking in integrity. In verse 1, the psalmist says, "I've walked in my integrity." And in verse 11, using the same words, he says, "I will walk in my integrity." Another connection is a sound connection. The word in verse 1 translated waver, imad, has the same consonant sounds as the word translated standing in verse 12, amda. This connection is further strengthened by the fact that usually it's feet that waver and people that stand. But here the images are reversed. Verse 1 talks about someone, a person, wavering, and verse 12 talks about a foot standing. This further forges a connection between the beginning of the psalm and the end of the psalm. And if the end of the psalm echoes its beginning, and if there's a unique third-person reference to the Lord in the beginning, then this would support seeing another third-person reference to the Lord at the end, in verse 12. "I will bless the Lord, uvarech Adonai." So the poetic structure of the psalm supports the reading of the Masoretic text, as do all of the other ancient versions. The reading of the Septuagint, "I will bless you, Lord," probably came about as a scribe wrote two kafs instead of one, maybe because he was inclined to see Adonai as a vocative, given the fact that the Lord is referred to in the second person throughout most of the psalm. In conclusion, then, we've translated verse 12b as, "In assemblies I shall bless the Lord." We give this interpretation an A rating. The final exegetical issue for Psalm 26 is in verse 8. We've translated the first line of this verse as, Lord, I love the dwelling place of your house. To illustrate the issue here in this verse, it's helpful to compare some other translations. The REB translation is very similar to ours. It says, Lord, I love the house where you dwell. The NEB, on the other hand, says, O Lord, I love the beauty of thy house. This comparison is especially interesting because the REB is a revision of the NEB. So originally the translation had beauty of thy house, and then this was later revised in the REB to read dwelling of thy house, or more idiomatically, the house where you dwell. The differences between these two translations reflect different underlying Hebrew texts. The REB is a translation of the Masoretic text, which reads, Ma'on betecha. This same Hebrew text is also found in the oldest Hebrew manuscript we have of this verse, the Qumran manuscript 4Q Psalms R. The NEB gives a translation of a hypothetical Hebrew text that reads, Noam betecha, the beauty of your house. I say hypothetical because there's actually no extant Hebrew manuscript that reads, Noam betecha. This reading instead has been reconstructed from the translation of the Septuagint. The Septuagint reads, Evprepian ikusu, which means something like the beauty of your house. Because words from the evprep word group are often used in the Septuagint to translate words related to the root nun ayin mem, and because nun ayin mem are the very same letters we find in the Masoretic text, albeit in a different order, it seems likely that the Septuagint did in fact read noam instead of ma'on. The question then is which reading is earlier and which reading is secondary. In the very next psalm, Psalm 27, the word noam is used in the context of the Lord's house. Psalm 27:4 says, One thing I have asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, b'noam Adonai, and to inquire in his temple. The juxtaposition of the word beauty and the word house in Psalm 27 might support seeing a similar juxtaposition here in Psalm 26. But the reading of the Masoretic text, Ma'on betecha, seems to be better supported by the immediate context. The parallel line in the second half of the verse says, Umakom mishkan kvodecha, the place of the dwelling of your presence, or the place where your presence dwells. Here in the second line, we have a noun referring to the temple, place, umakom, which even sounds like ma'on, and it's in construct with another noun referring to the temple, dwelling, mishkan. So this is very similar to what the Masoretic text has in the first line, the word dwelling, ma'on, in construct with your house. The parallelism then supports the reading of the Masoretic text, ma'on betecha, the dwelling place of your house. And while it might sound redundant to say the dwelling place of your house, we find a similar phrase in another psalm. Psalm 132 verse 3 uses the phrase bo'ohel beti, in the tent of my house, or the tent which is my house. Similarly, the construct chain in Psalm 26 can be paraphrased, the dwelling place which is, or which functions as, my house. In conclusion, then, we followed the traditional Hebrew text and translated this verse as the dwelling place of your house, or as the REB puts it in more natural English, the house where you dwell. We give this interpretation an A rating. How we resolve each of these exegetical issues shapes how we see the psalm as a whole. In verse 1, the psalmist declares his trust in the Lord, and he expresses that trust in a declaration about the future. Because I have trusted in the Lord, I shall not waver. The Lord will protect me on my journey through life. The psalm then ends in a way that echoes its beginning. The psalm began with the psalmist poetically setting out on a journey. He's walking in his integrity and he will not waver or slip. By the end of the psalm, he's at the end of his journey, and he's no longer walking, but is now standing on solid ground, on a plain, and he's blessing the Lord in the assemblies. The third person reference to the Lord in verse 12 is one of several elements that ties the end of the psalm back to its beginning. In the middle of the psalmist is in the temple. He washes his hands and circles the altar and lets everybody there know about the Lord's wonders. At the end of this central section, in verse 8, he tells the Lord how much he loves the dwelling place, which is the Lord's house, the place where his presence dwells. By using so many different words to describe the temple, the dwelling place, his house, place, dwelling, each of which describes the temple from a slightly different angle, the psalmist is able to give expression to the love and to the awe that he feels for the Lord and for his house. This has been the Exegetical Issues video for Psalm 26, in which we explore the difficult and important issues that interpreters of the psalm are likely to encounter. Our overview video provides a coherent interpretation of the psalm, and our Poetic Features video explores the natively Hebrew poetic nature of the psalm. All these videos are offered free of charge thanks to the generosity of our donors. Please visit us at cdbr.org to learn more.